Clark Gable as Fletcher Christian. Clark Gable as Fletcher Christian may have looked every bit the swashbuckling adventurer in Mutiny on the Bounty, yet behind the scenes he was far from satisfied. Despite this picture's critical acclaim and its Academy Award for Best Picture in 1935, Gable later expressed regret over that character. He disliked being clean-shaven, a requirement for historical accuracy, and found the stiff naval costume confining, an uncomfortable match for the rugged, modern screen persona he'd established in films like It Happened One Night. At the time, MGM had invested a massive budget into the production, and Gable felt compelled to accept the part more for studio politics than genuine artistic interest. Rumors swirled that he clashed with director Frank Lloyd, reportedly annoyed by what he perceived as insufficient emotional depth in the script. Biographers recall Gable once lamenting that portrayal left him with little dramatic material. The grueling shoot in Tahiti, plagued by delays and logistical headaches, only heightened his frustration. Some insiders conjectured that the ordeal left him cautious about historical sagas, and while he didn't shun them entirely, Gone with the Wind arrived just 4 years later. He gravitated more toward grounded contemporary characters in subsequent years. For Gable, Fletcher Christian was less a career triumph and more a word of warning. Rock Hudson as Ron Kirby. Rock Hudson as Ron Kirby in Douglas Sirk's 1955 melodrama, All That Heaven Allows, became an emblem of mid-century romantic idealism. But for Hudson, that portrayal carried a hidden cost. While this feature cemented his image as a leading man, biographers and film scholars have pointed to the tension it created between his public persona and private identity. Hudson, who was privately gay during a time when studios strictly enforced heteronormative branding, became locked into parts that reinforced a version of masculinity he never identified with. According to Sarah Davison's biography, Rock Hudson, His Story, the pressure to maintain this illusion off-screen weighed heavily on him. Though he never publicly denounced portraying Ron Kirby, his inner circle and later accounts suggest that the image it projected contributed to his lifelong struggle with authenticity. Some speculate that the relentless press tours and photo ops, where he had to play the part of the all-American heartthrob, left him emotionally drained. That on-screen persona's success typecast him in romantic leads, limiting opportunities to explore more complex or challenging characters. Decades later, critics have re-examined Hudson's performance, reading it as layered with unspoken conflict. The Criterion Collection's 2020 re-release included essays that explore this subtext, reframing the production as not just a technicolor fantasy, but a subtle portrait of personal sacrifice in a closeted industry. Legends tease that Hudson's quiet discomfort with such roles wasn't merely about acting, it was about surviving Hollywood's tightly sealed image machine. Bette Davis as Miss Moffett. In 1945, Bette Davis stepped into the role of Miss Moffett in The Corn is Green, a part she later admitted was a miscalculation. At just 36, Davis was cast as a stern, aging Welsh schoolteacher, a character traditionally portrayed as being in her 50s. Despite elaborate cosmetics and costuming, the age gap was hard to mask. Davis later reflected that she was simply too young for the part, and the mismatch affected the authenticity of her performance. Critics at the time echoed the sentiment. While the film was praised for its earnest themes, reviews noted that Davis's portrayal lacked the gravitas expected of the character. The New York Times described the film as well-intentioned but suggested that Davis felt out of place in the part, an unusual critique for an actress known for commanding the screen. Off-camera, creative tension brewed between Davis and director Irving Rapper. The two had previously collaborated on Now Voyager in 1942, but this time their visions clashed. Davis, by some accounts, pushed for a more emotionally grounded portrayal of Miss Moffett, while Rapper leaned toward a softer, more sentimental tone. Certain cinema experts speculate that the friction diluted the final product, leaving Davis dissatisfied with the outcome. The film's box office performance didn't help. Compared to Davis's recent hits like Mr. Skeffington and Now Voyager, The Corn is Green delivered modest returns. Studio whispers suggested they had fast-tracked the project, banking on Davis's star power rather than the story's fit. Whether rushed or simply miscast, the experience left Davis more cautious about future roles. Though the film didn't derail her career, it marked a rare stumble in a decade otherwise filled with triumphs. What makes this regret so compelling is its rarity. Davis built her legacy on sharp, emotionally complex characters, but with Miss Moffett, even her formidable skill couldn't bridge the disconnect. The performance never fully landed, and Davis knew it. Rita Hayworth as Carmen. In 1948, Rita Hayworth played Carmen in The Loves of Carmen, a Technicolor remake of the silent film from 1927, starring Dolores Del Rio. Both versions were based on Prosper Mérimée novella Carmen, but for Hayworth, the role was anything but a triumph. Though the film was produced by Columbia Pictures head Harry Cohn, who had a personal stake in its success, Hayworth allegedly saw the part as a professional misstep. According to biographer Barbara Leeming, Hayworth later referred to it as a mistake that felt like regression, not progress. The character of Carmen embodied everything Columbia had long projected onto Hayworth: fiery, exotic, and hypersexualized. That image had been carefully manufactured. Born Margarita Carmen Cancino, Hayworth underwent a dramatic transformation early in her career. Her hairline was reshaped through electrolysis, and her surname was changed to obscure her Spanish roots. Playing Carmen only reinforced the very stereotype she had spent years trying to escape. Movie historians have pointed to The Loves of Carmen as a turning point in Hayworth's uneasy relationship with the studio system. Adrienne McLean, in her book Being Rita Hayworth, explores how Columbia used the film to reassert control over Hayworth's image, prioritizing spectacle over substance. The script leaned heavily on flamenco choreography and visual flair, sidelining Hayworth's aspirations for more nuanced roles. Critics weren't impressed either. The New York Times called the film a gaudy spectacle, while Variety dismissed it as melodrama dressed up in color. Behind the scenes, tensions by multiple accounts flared between Hayworth and Cohn, whose controlling style clashed with her growing desire for artistic freedom. In later interviews, Hayworth expressed frustration about being boxed into parts that emphasized appearance over talent. While the exact quotes vary, the sentiment was consistent. She felt creatively confined. Some believe that The Loves of Carmen deepened her disillusionment with Hollywood. Not long afterward, she began stepping back from Columbia, eventually parting ways with the studio by the late 1950s. Whispers have long persisted that Cohn pushed the project as a personal showcase for Hayworth, whom he had a complicated relationship with both professionally and personally. Whether true or not, the film became a symbol of the limits placed on her career. For Rita Hayworth as Carmen, the regret wasn't just about a single portrayal, it was about everything that came with it. Errol Flynn as Jim Corbett. In 1942, Errol Flynn took on the role of Jim Corbett in Gentleman Jim, a polished biopic that swapped pirate swords for boxing gloves. It was a commercial hit, but Flynn apparently found little to celebrate. Known for his free-spirited, rebellious screen image, Flynn privately viewed the disciplined, gentlemanly Corbett as a poor fit. Biographer Charles Hyam noted that Flynn resented being pushed into the portrayal by Warner Brothers, who were eager to rebrand him as a serious actor. The boxing choreography, demanding even for a trained athlete, proved brutal for Flynn, whose health was already in decline due to chronic pain and substance issues. Behind the film's glossy success, tensions brewed. A number of film experts propose Flynn saw the project as a turning point, less a breakout than a breakdown in his relationship with the studio. He rarely revisited the film in later interviews, and while he never publicly condemned it, he also never embraced it. Flynn's disillusionment with Hollywood deepened in the years that followed. Myths whisper that Gentleman Jim marked the moment the swashbuckler's spirit began to fade, even as his star kept shining on screen. Peter Lorie as Mr. Moto. By 1937, Peter Lorie had already cemented his reputation with chilling performances in German cinema, especially in Fritz Lang's M. But when he stepped into the role of Mr. Moto, a Japanese detective in a series of 8 films churned out by 20th Century Fox between 1937 and 1939, his career took a complicated turn. The films were commercial hits, but for Lorie, they marked a creative dead end. A Jewish refugee who had fled Nazi Germany, Lorie found himself in a portrayal that required extensive cosmetics and an artificial speech to depict an Asian character. Commonplace in Hollywood at the time, but increasingly uncomfortable for him in hindsight. According to biographer Stephen D. Youngkin, Lorie described the films as lacking the psychological depth he craved. He allegedly said, "I had to eat," pointing to financial pressure as a key reason for accepting the role. Various commentators maintain that his real frustration stemmed less from the racial portrayal and more from being boxed into formulaic, low-risk parts that stifled his range. The Mr. Moto character was portrayed as intelligent and competent, arguably more respectful than other Asian depictions of the era, but the repetition and lack of dramatic challenge wore on Lorie. Talk circulated, he grew increasingly uneasy with the character as global tensions escalated and post-war attitudes began shifting. The series ended in 1939, not because of Lorie's discontent, but due to changing international dynamics that made a Japanese protagonist less marketable. Still, the shadow of Mr. Moto followed Lorie throughout his career, as he struggled to escape typecasting and exotic villain roles. For an actor once hailed for nuance and complexity, the role became both a lifeline and a limitation. Kim Novak as Mildred Rogers. When Columbia Pictures released its remake of Human Bondage in 1964, featuring Kim Novak as Mildred Rogers, comparisons to Bette Davis's intense 1934 portrayal were unavoidable and harsh. Davis's performance, which famously spurred a writing campaign for a Best Actress nomination after the Academy initially bypassed her, had established a nearly invincible benchmark. Novak, recognized for her enigmatic coolness in films like Vertigo from 1958, appeared miscast from the outset. In subsequent interviews, she allegedly called the production a disaster, admitting the venture shook her confidence. Critics at the time showed no restraint. Variety labeled the film emotionally inert, while the New York Times deemed her work lacking urgency. Whispers circulated in industry circles that Novak had feuded with director Ken Hughes about the movie's direction, claiming it robbed the source material of its psychological weight. Certain film historians proposed the backlash influenced her gradual retreat from prominent screen roles during the late 1960s. While Novak never offered a formal repudiation, her frank comments over the years have painted Of Human Bondage as a professional detour she regretted, one of the infrequent cases from the studio era in which a star openly distanced themselves from a role, despite that period's code of discretion. Henry Fonda as Pierre. Henry Fonda as Pierre Bazukov may be one of the most puzzling casting choices of the 1950s. At 51, Fonda was about 3 decades older than the introspective Russian nobleman he portrayed in the 1956 adaptation of War and Peace. Critics praised the film's grandeur, but Fonda's performance drew mixed reactions. Many felt he appeared out of place and emotionally distant. Fonda himself later acknowledged he never fully grasped Pierre's philosophical complexity. In various interviews, he described feeling disconnected from the part, admitting it was one of the few times he felt miscast. The production, a joint venture between Paramount and Italian producers Dino De Laurentiis and Carlo Ponti, was huge in scope but chaotic behind the scenes. Language barriers, shifting directorial visions, and the challenge of condensing Tolstoy's epic into a manageable runtime left limited room for character nuance. Some observers assume Fonda accepted the role more out of professional obligation than personal passion. Stories suggest he was nudged into the project by studio pressure rather than creative interest. The film did earn an Academy Award nomination for Best Art Direction, but Fonda's portrayal of Pierre remains a footnote in a career otherwise filled with iconic turns in The Grapes of Wrath and 12 Angry Men. Marilyn Monroe as Rosalind Tabor. Marilyn Monroe as Rosalind Tabor didn't find empowerment in her final completed role. She found exhaustion. In the 1961 drama The Misfits, Monroe portrayed a soft-spoken divorcee adrift in the Nevada desert, but behind the scenes the experience was anything but cathartic. Written by her then-husband Arthur Miller with Monroe in mind, the character of Rosalind mirrored her own emotional upheaval a little too closely. Biographer Donald Spoto and others have noted that Monroe felt exposed by the portrayal, with some reporting she described the shoot as a nightmare. The production was plagued by tension. Monroe's health was in decline, she was hospitalized for a substance-related incident, and filming was halted temporarily. Director John Huston is said to have grown frustrated with her frequent absences, while co-star Clark Gable, though publicly supportive, privately shared concerns about the scheduling. Word swirled that Monroe believed Miller had mined her personal anguish for the script, a suspicion that many believed deepened the rift leading to their divorce soon after the shoot ended. Though critics admired the film's authenticity, Monroe never voiced pride in it. The Misfits premiered in February of 1961 and became her final completed work before her death in August of the following year. For countless fans, Rosalind Tabor endures as her most poignant role, not just for what appeared on screen, but for what it revealed off camera. James Kagny as Lon Cheney. In 1957, James Kagny took on the role of Lon Cheney in Universal's biopic Man of a Thousand Faces. At first glance, it sounded like a fitting tribute, one Hollywood legend depicting another. But Kagny wasn't fully content. He later expressed disappointment with how the film glossed over the darker elements of Cheney's life. Born in 1883, Cheney was raised by deaf parents and experienced a tumultuous marriage to singer Cleva Creighton, whose public breakdown led to a widely reported scandal. These real-life ordeals deeply influenced his craft, but the studio sanitized much of it for the script. Kagny, celebrated for prioritizing character insight over the studio polish, by some accounts lobbied for a more genuine depiction. Anecdotes suggest he felt the final cut reduced Cheney's complexity to sentimentality. The extensive prosthetics didn't help either. Though critics applauded Kagny's portrayal, some maintain he found the makeup confining and the role emotionally limiting. While the film performed decently, Kagny's initial enthusiasm waned. He had hoped to reveal Cheney's interior struggles, not just his costumes. Instead, he left feeling the production had been dulled by Hollywood's appetite for a neat storyline. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment. Also consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our new videos each week. Thanks for watching.